Hi, this is Rebecca Teeter from Rebecca Teeter Transformational Coaching. I work with people who are emerging into a calling that they have, usually related to healing work of some kind or creative work. My goal is to help get people over their fears and out into the world and doing their work and showing their work. Because until we actually take those steps, we can't really know what the full capacity is that we're capable of, and we can't really know what our true gifts are. It actually takes taking action to know. So you may have seen this earlier. I wanted to talk to you today about roses, because one of the things that I do along with coaching is I do energy guidance, and that means I also do reading. And whereas someone who uses divination tools like tarot cards or bones will use the items to represent different things in a reading, I go into meditation and I go into a particular state and I use my intuition to look at symbols and pictures. And the most common symbol that I use is a rose. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how does this one symbol provide a lot of information about someone or their questions or the information that they're curious about. And this is just an introduction, and I'm certainly not telling you in this how to do it, but it might give you a little clue as to what it's like if you get a reading from me. So as I mentioned before, first I will go into state and then I will connect with you. And then I will invite the questions or the energy of the questions that you have, or even your energy, into this symbol of a rose. And the rose will transform. And sometimes it transforms in small ways, like it changes color, the shape. Sometimes it doesn't even look like a rose. And occasionally when it doesn't look like a rose, it'll just look like a different flower. Sometimes it becomes something else entirely. And then the next step is to really be in curiosity about what shows up and to ask questions. But for today, what I really wanted to do was talk about when a rose is a rose and what parts of a rose do I look at and maybe a little bit of why or what it might show me. So the first thing that I always try to do is to look at the color. So the color is going to represent some kind of vibrational energy that spirit is bringing into your energy field to help you with whatever you're facing. So that'll be my first thing to try and look at. Sometimes a color is a really clear color like you find on this rose. Sometimes it's a multitude of colors. Sometimes there's a quality to the color that's really important. And I'm also, in my intuitive ability, really big on texture. So sometimes the petals, I'll get a sense of whether they feel firm or soft, or like this rose is a little aged, a little more aged than I would like to show. And that might mean something if your rose is a little brown on the edges or curled. The shape of the petals might be different. I also look at how compact is it. So the actual bud of the rose tends to represent more of the upper chakras, like the 6th and the 7th. And those are the most spiritually based chakras. So how wide open your rose is going to say something about how available are you to your own information. The next thing that I usually look at is I go to the other end and I look to see what do the roots look like, or are there roots? So sometimes a rose will show up like this and it'll be cut, and that will mean something different than if you have a very strong taproot that goes down into the earth. Occasionally I'll see roots that go on the top of the earth or just under the earth. That of course has a different meaning. And it's important each time when I see that to ask, for this person, what does this mean? From the root system, I'll usually come up and look at the stem itself. When I first learned this technique, I learned that the stem can represent a timeline in someone's life. So for example, if you have a thorn, it might indicate, if it's closer to the ground, something that's happened earlier in life. And occasionally that's true for me. It can be a timeline, but more often than not, it shows up for me as some kind of representative of the health of the idea or the health of the issue that the person's facing, or sometimes even not necessarily the actual physical health of a person, but the energetic health. And again, I rely a lot on texture here. So is it smooth? Is it soft? Does it have fur growing on it like some stems do? Does the stem actually look like a rose stem, or does it look like a different flower stem? Or is it a tube? All those things can have totally different meanings. And then I'll also look at, is it curved like this one? Is it really curved? Does it have a funny shape to it? Is it straight up and down? And again, those might mean different things. And I'll look at the elements on the stem if there are any. Thorns often indicate some kind of pain or discomfort or issues to face, obstacles perhaps. Leaves usually represent some kind of dependency. So they might represent people in your life that lean on you a lot, or problems that you're shouldering in relation to whatever the reading is about. But they could show up meaning something entirely different. And one of the things I'm always open to when I do a reading is to find out, like, what good information is coming through for someone. Where are they being supported by spirit? Where are they being acknowledged? And so even all of these elements in one particular reading could show up as something like that. So a thorn might not represent pain. Sometimes I look at the thorn and I see, like, is it very sharp? Does it look like it's healed? Because it could be an affirmation that you've done a lot of healing on the wounds in your life. So you have to be really, really curious each time when looking at a symbol, and you have to be really connected into what information is coming through for this person at this time. So another key element to look at when looking at a rose is to look at this area of the rose right here. So there's a bulge that happens where the bloom attaches to the stem, and that area is really important. It's called the hip of the rose. So I always look at that because the hip correlates to the 5th chakra on a person's energy field. So that's the communication center. That's hugely important. How are you communicating with yourself? How are you communicating with others? How are you communicating with spirit? Are you getting your own information? This is often a key when I need to really look at the 5th chakra for someone to help ferret out what might be in their way. Everything in life is relationship. We're either in relationship with people or projects or ideas or even our work. Like, we're in relationship all the time. So our communication needs to be really on point. And we need to heal things around communication so that we can communicate clearly. Atop of that, you'll see these little leaf-like elements that come out. And I've been really getting more interested in these in a reading because I've discovered that in my readings, they often represent support. Are you supported? Are your ideas supported? How are they supported? Are the sepals pushing up against the rose and maybe limiting your ability to bloom out to receive information or not? Or are they really big and overpowering? Do you have too much support? Maybe you need to take more risk. So it's just a really interesting thing to start to look at and to see, like, how can each element and all the myriad of ways that they can show up give really specific information and clues about what you're facing. And what's really nice, and one of my clients has mentioned this a couple times, that they really like the idea that I'm using this symbol to talk about their issues or even them, that element of being able to step back and be a little removed feels a little less scrutinized. And I like that idea. So as I mentioned, the hip is often the 5th chakra, which means that the rose often relates to the 6th and 7th chakras. And that's what's really curious for me. And one of the ways that, even though I learned this technique somewhere else and I learned that things meant certain things, this is one of the places where it's starting to really differentiate for me. And I'm learning a lot about how spirit talks to me about what information can come through. The stem has really started to indicate more about a person and how their chakras that relate more to being in the physical world are doing. So I've started doing my readings where I start with the symbol of a rose, as I learned. And as I learned, usually we'll go through each of the 7 chakras. But I'm discovering when I do a rose reading that it really gives me clues about what else do I need to look at. And what's really great about that, because there's more you can look at than just the 7 chakras. There's a whole bunch of energetic anatomy that we have that are rarely talked about. We have channels all throughout our energy that affect different things like our presence in the world, our creativity, um, how we connect to the earth, how we connect to the cosmos. Even our own healing energy has channels. And so I'm not limited to just looking at the chakras, because this gives me information about where to go in my reading. It provides a map. So I think I mentioned already that sometimes a rose isn't a rose. And sometimes a rose shows up out in nature, and sometimes it doesn't. So one of the common elements that will happen that's curious is sometimes my rose will show up rooted, sometimes it'll be cut off, sometimes it'll be in a vase, on a table, on a stage, in a theater. And so each one of those elements starts to mean something. So I always look at the external environment that the rose shows up into, and I'll look at things like soil quality. Is there grass? Are there mountains? Is there trees? And there's an element of sometimes that's really important and sometimes it isn't. So again, it's like, what's drawing my attention? Are there people that show up when I have your energy in a rose? That's curious. Are there bugs? Is there a ladybug maybe? A worm? A bird of some sort? Different elements can show up in the environment. Sometimes the ground, even if it'll be outside, will have tiles on it. Sometimes there will be borders between where the rose is and maybe where grass grows. Or I also look to see always, is there a sun overhead? The sun represents the divine. Is there a moon? Are they both there? Are they directly over the rose? So there is this huge library of information that can come when you start to just look at one symbol. So I hope that provides just a little bit of an overview of what might happen if you get a reading from me. And if you have any questions, of course, please ask them. I'm always curious what other people are curious about. And sometimes that can open dialogue and it increases understanding. And so I love questions. They're really important. The questions we ask ourselves, the questions we ask other people can be life-changing. If you enjoyed this and you want to share it out, please do so. Of course, you can find me on my website, www.rebeccateeter.com. I have a Facebook page that I use, and there's an email list. And if you sign up for my email list, you actually get a short course that talks about energy, it talks about the mind, and how to do something creative to bring your intuitive information out into the world. Thank you for watching.